Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the OutMarket.Pro Podcast, where small business owners and other industry professionals share their real-world insights and hard-earned lessons. Today, it's all served up with a side of bourbon. I'm your host, Mark Stein, and I'm excited to be here today with John Smart, a leader with years of experience in the spirits and wine industry, with more than 2 decades leading sales and strategic partnerships at one of the largest family-owned spirits companies in the country. John has seen it all or close to it. So, John, welcome, and let's dive in.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me here today. I'm very happy to be here.
Good. So let's start out and mention that one of the largest companies, and and then back up and talk a little bit about your background and history, especially obviously we're focused on the bourbon industry.
Yes, well, thank you. One of the largest companies that you were referring to is Heaven Hill Brands. They're the largest um, family-owned and operated distillery in America, going strong, 3 generations. I served there for 22 years in sales, sales leadership, and providing uh, the liaison, if you will, to the leadership at Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits, which is Heaven Hills, I should say, primary distributor partner. And then prior to those 22 years, I was in the distribution end of it with Southern Wine and Spirits, long before there was a Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits partnership. And that was the middle tier of this three-tier system, which we have in our industry: supplier slash manufacturer, distributor slash wholesaler, and then the retail end of it, which could be on-premise or off-premise retail sales. So I was in the distribution end of it for 21 years. And in that respect, it was both spirits and wine, on-premise, off-premise, but also managing uh, a team of sales representatives. So it's been a great career. I've loved it all. 43 years of experiences, and it's been good to me. It's actually been good to my family. My father, I walked in his footsteps, if you will, did 43 years at Brown-Forman. That was it. Coming out of that era, out of the late 50s, that's what guys did in those days. They joined a company and they committed to it and they stayed there. They didn't move around as much as people tend to do today. And my brother is also in the industry. Uh, um, he has a company known as Heritage Wine and Spirits, which is a boutique distributor based in Kentucky. So there's a lot of this spirits and wine running through the Smart family, but it's good. I've enjoyed it, and I left Heaven Hill Brands at the end of December, but I was very careful and resistant to use the word retire or retiring. Um, because I'm not relating to that well right now. I want to stay going. I want to stay in this industry, and so as I'm sure we will discuss in a minute, I've kind of gone into more of the consulting end of it, and knowing that I could continue to make a contribution in this business. Thank you.
Awesome. And 40 something years doesn't measure to your appearance, which is more like 35, but that's a mathematical impossibility. So,
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah. Maybe the business uh, keeps one young, perhaps. Yeah. Yeah. I
right.
can tell you for sure, working with young people, as I'm sure you have done in your career, will keep you on your toes and will keep you young. And
Yeah.
and I have done a lot of that. Yes.
Um, okay, great. Yeah, that's a good overview. And
Hmm.
we'll talk more about the consulting side that you're moving into later on.
Hmm.
You know, I would love to know the statistics on this, but your tenure in this business, especially my guess is around the last 15 or 20 years, you've witnessed an explosion in interest in whiskey, in particular bourbon. And I'm sure there are a lot of people that use those terms interchangeably.
They do, and it's okay. Yeah.
So we'll
Hmm.
need to give some definitions to it. And I think it's sort of a slippery slope from what I gather from our previous conversations as far as differentiating
Hmm.
between those two. But certainly the industry has grown tremendously while you have been in it. And I'm sure you contributed to that, but it's a bigger phenomenon than any one person. So talk about that. If you have any statistics on growth during the last 10, 20 years, that would be great. But
Well,
and then talk about what it's been like to be not just a witness, but a participant in
yeah.
that growth.
Well, statistics aside, it's an industry that tends to be cyclical, and these trends definitely come and go. So here's an example, a great example. So when I left Southern Wine and Spirits to join Heaven Hill, was actually one of the low points in the bourbon. And so 22 years ago, all this excitement that we have right now in the bourbon industry, it was relatively low. What was happening was vodka. It was all about vodka. If you walk into a nice restaurant and you see four guys sitting at the bar, all enjoying an old fashioned together or a Manhattan or one of these classic bourbon cocktails today, 20 years ago, they would have been drinking martinis. And when one looks up at that back bar, it's amazing. You can kind of tell a lot about this business just by observing. You walk into a restaurant or a fine um, bar or tavern, you look at the back bar, and I look at the colors. And what I mean by that is 20 years ago, that back bar was basically solid white. Vodka, 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 and a little bit of gin, a little bit of tequila, a little bit of whiskey here and there. But it was all about, and so that was the color that you see. And then gradually over these years, I refer to it as the, sounds a little quirky, but the browning of the back bar. It started becoming a little bit of brown, even in places like California, which I've traveled to a lot, are traditionally white spirit states. All of a sudden, even out there in San Francisco, bourbon started to come up, and you could see the browning of the back bar. Now, when you walk into an account, you can in Louisville, Kentucky, in on Frankfurt Avenue, there's a business called Bourbon's Bistro. The whole account is dedicated to bourbon. And when you walk into there, the back bar is all brown. In other words, we call them brown goods, the whiskeys and the bourbons, and a little bit of scotch. But that just show that's the cyclical nature of it. And it doesn't mean that it will be that way forever. It could come back down, and one of the other categories could come up, because I should tell you, in as much as we're speaking about this browning of the back bar, tequila is the hottest thing going. It is very hot. It is like at a 45-degree angle on a sales chart right now, and it's not what perhaps you and I might know from our younger days, shots and all this procedure that we have. These are expensive products. These are premium tequilas that are made for cocktails, very sophisticated approach to cocktails in much the same way that bourbon is. So these are not people doing shots or perhaps partying too much. This is part of the evolution of the cocktail culture, mixology culture, and tequila is a big part of that. So perhaps this cyclical that I'm speaking of, it could already be in a little bit of a transition. Now, the industry would pretty much hope that that we haven't peaked in this bourbon yet, because there are so many people out there who have invested a lot of money, some of their savings, or they've had investors come in to start these new distilleries, these new startup companies, these craft distilleries, as they're sometimes referred to, and they too are hoping that there's quite a future in this industry. That's one of the reasons that I got into this consulting world, because I thought that perhaps I can be helpful to these new companies because of the experience that I've had in sales and sales leadership.
Before we get too far,
Hmm.
will you distinguish bourbon from whiskey?
Hmm. Well, bourbon is whiskey, okay,
Right?
but as is Scotch is whiskey, but and other things are whiskey. But in order to distinguish between bourbon and whiskey, bourbon just has more restrictions. I will the first myth that I will dispel is bourbon, even though in the state of Kentucky, and I live in Lexington, Kentucky, proudly, and this is the home of bourbon. Bardstown, Kentucky is known as the bourbon capital of the world, they refer to it. So a lot of it is happening here, but in spite of what people may think, it's it does not have to be made in Kentucky. Bourbon only needs to be made in the United States. It's an American product, and that is the one geographic restriction, is that it needs to be made in America. Beyond that, you get into more of the process, is the amount of alcohol in the still when the distillation process starts, how much is in that there, the amount of alcohol that's in there when it goes into the barrel itself. That all has to be measured carefully statistically. The barrel itself has to be new, brand new, charred oak barrel to age bourbon. Bourbon cannot be aged in a used barrel. These are laws, and they're carefully adhered to. And so it would have to be aged at a minimum of 2 years in a charred oak barrel. And what is it that's aged in there? It's a grain product. This is agriculture, if you will. This is corn, malted barley, and in most cases, rye is the third grain. So those are cooked, distilled, and aged. Um, and that's essentially the way the product. I mentioned that rye mostly, but there was also a bourbon, I call it, in the industry, they refer to it as a mash bill. I kind of like to put it more in standard English and say a grain recipe. So the grain recipe for bourbon, the first restriction, it has to be at least 51% corn. Hardly anyone does 51%, but 51% is the minimum. Most people, the corn is in the 70s, sometimes up as far as 78%. The other two ingredients being malted barley and rye. But occasionally there's not rye, rather there is wheat, and that's referred to as a wheated bourbon. And it has a little bit different uh, uh, flavor to it because of the wheat. One of the most popular one that people know about, and they may not even know it's a wheated bourbon, but it is, and that's Maker's Mark, which is a very fine product. Heaven Hill, my former company, they have a fantastic product too, known as Larceny. Both of those products are wheated bourbons, meaning the grain recipe, corn, malted barley, and wheat. So uh, that's for someone who would like a little bit more of a sweeter, has a sweeter palate, a little bit easier. It's not as harsh, or it doesn't have the bite that some bourbons do. And many people prefer that. That's not a negative. Many people prefer a stronger, more masculine taste profile, but the wheated bourbons are a little bit smoother and slightly sweeter. So um, it's a very interesting process.
I had heard, and I'm sure it's just lore, that the water used was related to it, like a certain limestone
Yeah,
water that's
the
common
li-
in Kentucky.
the water in Kentucky is a contributing factor, and especially was years ago when this industry started. I mean, generations ago. Um, the other the other factor that makes Kentucky at the center of this industry to me is the four seasons that we have here. The summer, winter, fall, spring. Kentucky has all four of those, and that creates a lot of interesting interaction in the when this bourbon goes into a barrel to begin the aging process. It goes into an aging warehouse. Some people call them rick houses. Some people refer to them as rack houses. Either way, it's the same thing as storage facility. And the inside of that barrel and inside of the rack, there's an interaction with the hot weather, the cool weather, cold weather, mild weather, and the changing of the temperature throughout the year adds to the flavor of the bourbon and makes it a more interesting product as opposed to having one being hot all the time or cold all the time. So that's another reason why Kentucky, yeah, the water, yes, as you mentioned, and but the changing of the seasons is really important to the aging process. And really the aging process is probably, the barrel itself, it's probably the most underrated part of the process because it's all kind of back here. It's kind of behind the scenes, back of the house, if you will. What we see, the general public sees is what you see out in the accounts. The product is in the bottle, it's in the glasses. That's what we experience. But the aging process is where the magic happens, as one of our great master distillers here in Kentucky has said. This is where the magic happens, is in the barrel, and that happens in the rick house. So it's 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 definitely one of the most interesting parts of the process is the barrel maturation.
Is the environment in the warehouse modified at all, or do you just let the seasons take over?
Not modified at all. The seasons take over, and then we want the people in the industry, the master distillers, and the people working at that end of the business. They they want it to be natural, and Mother Nature can handle that. It's better not to have any artificial means of controlling temperatures. People will attempt to do that, and there's no law against it. Um, as far as affecting the temperature within the rick house. But I think, there's certain traditions that are maybe better off not being trifled with in a modern day way. Just let it alone. It's been doing well for all these years. So yeah,
What about what
I
about moving the barrels or turning them? Is
mhm.
there
Yeah,
anything that goes on
well,
during?
and that me- with all the different distilleries that we have, many of them have different attitudes and different traditions in terms of that process. What you're referring to primarily there would be to a rotation where you would rotate barrels from one place in the rick house to another, or perhaps from one rick house to another. Um, and there are those companies who will leave well enough alone, and once the barrel is in the rick house, that's where it's going to stay. So it's a philosophical approach that each company has and each master distiller has. Um, and to each his own in terms of that philosophy. I will say, in term any company that would opt to do a significant rotation, meaning moving barrels around to key places, um, very labor intensive. Okay. These are heavy, heavy barrels, awkward to move, sometimes dangerous to move. And if you don't have to do it, you're better off not doing it. But if you choose to do it, trust me, it's very labor intensive and there's an additional cost involved to that.
Mhm. Might it be just for to get them closer to out the door. They're going to move them uh, for distribution purposes later. That the newer barrels are in this warehouse and on this end of that warehouse. Is it more about logistics
Yeah,
than
kind of a FIFO, if you will, first in, first out kind of a thing.
yeah,
It,
rather than
it's
a
possible,
theory?
yeah, it's possible that that could become part of the rotation process. That would be left up to that distillery to decide that. I think more often though, what happens, Mark, is first of all, one of the qualifications, if you will, to being a master distiller is to be have an excellent palate. Okay, to be able to taste in a very discerning way. And beyond that, most of these companies they don't just rely on the master distiller for that. They have like a team of tasters. What an interesting thing to do for a living, huh? But they, what happens is over the years, they develop an understanding of key places in key rick houses where maturation is happening at a more of an accelerated level, or perhaps maturing more slowly. And that has to do with the different floors. These are 7 or 8 floors high, some of these rick houses. And so they go and they sample various barrels in various places, and they make a determination based upon that sampling of one, which product, when this bourbon, when it goes into the barrel and starts maturing, it in many of these places, it had the determination has not been made at that point as to what this product, what this bourbon is going to be used for. So in terms of their product line that any particular company might have. So they need to make that determination. And they also need to make the determination of whether it's ready to be the barrel to be extracted, the whiskey that they refer to as dumped, whether the barrel would be dumped at this point or not. So they're tasting every day, and they get a feel for where these pivotal and strategic spots in the rick houses where the bourbon is at a certain stage or not. So again, that's that back to my point earlier, probably the most underrated part of the process, and perhaps the most important process, is that all that goes into the aging process.
Do all bourbons, I'm sure it's a hodgepodge. Do When they're ready to be bottled, do some of them come out of the same barrel, use the same barrel and bottle everything? And I think some of them, the barrels are mixed to give a blend. And is there a
Yeah,
certain type of bourbon
yeah.
where that's done and a certain type where it's all from the same barrel?
Well, back to my comment from a few minutes ago, one of the key restrictions or key regulations, if you will, to make for Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey is you can only use the barrel one time for bourbon. So once the bourbon comes out of that barrel and is being processed, now that barrel, it it can be utilized in other ways. It can be used for blended whiskey. It can be shipped along with many other barrels to Scotland, and they can age their Scotch whiskey in those barrels. They can sell it to people who aren't even in the business. It could be cut in half and used as a planter or something. Uh, uh, but uh, but it can't be used to produce bourbon again.
Now,
Uh,
what I
but
meant was, uh, let's say you've got 3 barrels that are
mhm.
ready to bottle.
Yes,
Do they mix those 3 together? They're
yes,
all coming at the same time.
that's a good
And
question. Yeah, here's the answer. So the answer to that is there are essentially three, I would say, three quantitative ways in which this product is dumped and bottled. Okay, and there are three distinctive ways. and the first two are kind of inherent in the name of the product. So the first one is something which would be a single barrel.
Okay.
For example, at Heaven Hill, they have Evan Williams single barrel. Great product. Well, guess how many barrels went into that product? Okay. You are consuming bourbon that came out of one single barrel. And that makes it very interesting because that product is going to vary somewhat because there's no way you can precisely replicate each one of these but that variance that taste variance that's coming out is what makes it interesting and also what makes it highly sought after. The next one moving up the line would be something that is referred to as small batch. Now, small batch, is not technically an industry regulation term. It's a term that the industry will use loosely defined as um, I will say 200 barrels or less. Okay, so a distillery could take 90 barrels and marry those. I like to use that word marry into a vat and bottle that, and that would be called a small batch, which they're very popular on the market. There's a lot of small batch out there, and that has its own marketing opportunities and it has its own consumer appeal. So single barrel, small batch. The last one would be something I would call mass production, and that would be something similar to a Jim Beam, their white label product, to Heaven Hills, Evan Williams, sometimes referred to as Evan Williams Black Label. There would be hundreds of barrels, perhaps thousand or more barrels processed at a time to create hundreds and hundreds of cases in one processing period of time to create that product. So once again, single barrel, small batch, mass produced. Those are the three ways.
Okay. Do I recall a huge fire at Heaven Hill that
Yes.
destroyed? Well, tell us about it. And for the folks here, I live in Tampa Bay, but I
Hmm.
lived in Louisville or Louisville, as the natives call it.
Yes.
Because I'm originally from Georgia, I always had trouble saying Louisville, and you sort of swallow it as you say
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Um, but this is one of those events that really gather got the attention of
Hmm.
people in the region.
Yes.
Seems like it was a huge fire and very traumatic for the company. Can you
Yes. Yes.
recall it?
I can. I was not employed there at the time, but living here and I was working for Southern Wine and Spirits at the time, and I was representing Heaven Hill Brands in my distribution role. So yes, that was in 1996, and it was a terrible fire that broke out on the Heaven Hill campus. A very dramatic and sad day out there, frankly. And seven of these rick houses that I've been referring to, which each of them hold about 20,000 barrels of product. So easily over 100,000 up to 140,000 barrels, which is a significant part of the inventory, was destroyed on that day. And is that and if as if that's not enough, uh, trauma and drama for one day. Even worse than that, the distillery itself was destroyed. So seven rick houses, the fire coming down the side of the hill, like compared to lava out of a volcano almost, and it went into the distillery and destroyed that. So it was a terrible day for the company, but also a day of opportunity, a day that proved the resilience of the company. They never skipped a beat. They found other ways to go to continue to produce bourbon where other distilleries at the time stepped up in a very human, compassionate way, and they helped the company get back on its feet by continuing to do production in other distilleries. That would have been for a 3-year period. So in 1999, uh, the company was able to find an opportunity to purchase another distillery, and it's in downtown Louisville, directly next to where Brown-Forman is located, and it's known as the Bernheim Distillery. So Heaven Hill has been producing their whiskey distillates there since 1999. Recently, Heaven Hill has opened a new Heaven Hill Springs distillery, as it's referred to, in Bardstown, a big, beautiful, uh, modern day contemporary distillery that is now up and running in Bardstown. So they're doing both. The one in Louisville is up and is continues to run and with great capacity, and now they have an so the significance from historical significance is that they've Heaven Hill has returned to Bardstown. The company's always been based in Bardstown, but now they're back from a production standpoint, and that's really significant. Given I mentioned early in the podcast that Bardstown being the referred to as the bourbon capital of the world, a major company located there would want to also be doing production there, and so that is happening. So, yeah, that was going back to 1996, a sad day for the company, a financial loss certainly, but no one was injured. There were no fatalities, thank you, but no injuries. Um, but they prove their resilience, as I said earlier, and their passion for the industry, and they sort of went back to work the next day, fully energized to continue the mission. So the company deserves a lot of credit for that.
Hmm.
The ownership, the leadership, the Shapiro family who who continues to own and direct the company today.
Um, Something that we haven't discussed is my particular taste in bourbon. And you seem very level and not so partisan uh, to Heaven Hill not to be able to discuss it. And in fact, you mentioned it, Maker's Mark.
Hmm.
And I don't like the actual taste of alcohol. And to me, the Maker's Mark, which is, I think it's commonly described as having both an oaky flavor and a vanilla flavor.
Hmm.
And you can talk about, the different qualities of it that people discuss. But when I drink it, I don't feel like
Hmm.
I'm drinking alcohol. I mean, I know it goes to my head and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and so can you talk about that? And uh, there's some bourbons that just the alcohol taste or the
Hmm.
experience just overwhelms me. Can you talk about that a little bit and maybe talk about some other brands that have a similar
Hmm.
smooth quality um, in regards to alcohol
Yeah.
taste?
It there's it's highly probable, Mark, that what you're experiencing there is what we were discussing earlier with the introduction of the wheat grain.
Okay.
Yes, and for many years, I mean, first of all, your brand of choice, Maker's Mark, has always been a wheated bourbon.
Okay.
It it wasn't always referred to that way because this grain recipe or more technically known as mash bill, has this those breakdowns. Remember, I said 78% corn, and it was the rest being malted barley and rye or wheat or whatever percentage of corn, as long as it's more than 51. Those statistics have not always been available. The the distilleries, for various reasons, always kept those very close to the vest. It was sort of a company. See, even
Like KFC's
I think,
secret recipe.
yeah, well, yes, yeah, and I think even some people, many people, even within the company, weren't, so much privy to that. As time has gone on, and the interest in this business has just been overwhelming, from a consumer standpoint to to podcast standpoint to social media. People want to know these things. And the knowledge that they are now receiving makes them even better informed, more enthusiastic consumers who can exchange all this information as they purchase all these different products. So my point being, in a little bit of a wordy fashion, sorry, is that for many, many years, people were enjoying the product maker's mark, enjoying the flavor of it and the taste profile of it, but not knowing why. And the why is not really that important. Hey, you bought this product, you're enjoying it. Why do you need to know all these details? Well, it once people started discussing these grains more openly, then obviously the fact that this is a wheated bourbon became well known. And because there were so many other bourbons out there based upon rye being the third grain, it became apparent to people that that was the reason that people were enjoying Makers so much. In particular, people who could be new adopters, early adopters into bourbon. Um, um, it was a nice way for women there's a lot of women involved in this business now, not just consuming product, but running distilleries and very active. But in terms of them consuming bourbon, that wasn't always the case. But when there was a time when you would see women enjoying this product, there was a good chance it was this weeded product of Maker's Mark, and that made it easy for everyone to enjoy, not just the men, but new people coming in. Like, say, if you're a vodka drinker or a gin drinker and you want to start, it seems like everyone's having a good time with bourbon. I would like to be more involved in it. Well, that was the product that people found. And that's another, and I'm in the same way that we discussed this earlier in our conversation. I mentioned this product known as larceny. And larceny, I'm using that as a comparison to Maker. That is Heaven Hill's wheated bourbon. So again, with the grain recipe, corn, malted barley, and wheat. So back to this, the way you started this conversation is because you found it very enjoyable, and I think basically what you're saying, it was not hot to your palate. It was a little bit smoother, and that's what people find in these wheated products. But in saying so, and I also alluded to this earlier, there are a lot of people out there who want the punch of a rye-based bourbon, and not just, remember, we're not just speaking about the grain recipe here, but we're in a period of time now where these high proof barrel strength products are completely in vogue right now. I mean, some of the brands that we may have grown up with, which were 80 proof, which is where, by the way, where bourbon needs to be at least an 80 proof product. Um, that may not do it for people anymore. The 90, I think Maker's Mark is 90 proof. That's fine, but a lot of people are drinking products up in the 100s now, and some of these products that the distilleries are producing are coming out as they either call them barrel proof or barrel strength, cask strength. So you're able to go into a store and purchase a bottle of bourbon that could be 128 proof. So be careful with that, by the way. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's but there is a market for that. So I would,
Are there other?
I don't think you're ready for that right now, Mark, frankly,
No,
but
I don't know.
okay.
I'm sure I'm not.
Okay.
Although I do have a self-driving Tesla,
Yeah.
so it could drive me home technically, but I'm still
You
responsible
should
when
probably
I'm
already, you need to already be home when you start consuming the 100.
there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe close to the bed
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
So
Other than
let me just,
larceny,
if I may mention though, just this,
yeah.
I think if you try to take everything we've just discussed in the last few minutes and where one of the things that's made the industry so successful is that there are just so many choices out there. And not just choices of brands. Yes, there are dozens of brands out there, but choices in terms of what we refer to as taste profiles. You know, each distillery has its own unique characteristics. You know, if you enjoy the products, a product or two that Jim Beam is producing, there's a good chance you will enjoy all those products. It has a unique characteristic, as does Heaven Hill has unique characteristics in and of that company, as does Sazerac over based in the Buffalo Trace company based in Frankfurt. Very unique characteristics, and then they have products within their company that have unique characteristics unto themselves. So the consumer has a wide array of choices that will suit them, and it just makes it so much fun and 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 such a dynamic, interesting business right now from both a manufacturing standpoint, a distribution standpoint, and a consumer standpoint. It's a lot of fun.
Can you give me, other than larceny from Heaven Hill, can you give me others that may have a similar profile, sort of a mild,
Well,
that I might
well,
try?
well, the one of the brands is making a lot of noise these days because of its popularity, and the people are willing to spend a lot of money for this, both at retail and in charity events, is where you see it a lot, is the Pappy Van Winkle, sometimes just referred to as Pappy. You know, even people who aren't well versed in this business have heard that, and all of these uh, the products coming out of this Van Winkle family and the Pappy in particular, those that does come from a weeded formula. So a weeded mash bill, I should say. So there are enough weeded products out there to go around. It still pales in comparison to the number of I just refer to as traditional, but traditional rye-based bourbon. And you know, there was a time we it wasn't even referred to as rye-based bourbon because there wasn't that much wheat out there. We did, but now we definitely do make that distinction. We call it a rye-based bourbon or a weeded bourbon. But you
Mm,
know, there are many others.
good, thank you. Um, so without us getting political here, let's do insert an economic challenge that is at its root political, and that is the tariffs under the current administration.
Hmm.
And actually, when they were in power before, I think is when it started. And tell us why you think bourbon has become a target. I especially hear it from Canada, um, Western Europe, that they are retaliating against some of our tariffs by targeting bourbon. Um, is it because it's gotten so popular in other countries? Um, just talk about it a
Yeah,
little bit and what the potential ramifications are, because in a few articles that I've read, it sounds like this could be a medium to long term
hmm.
uh, factor affecting sales overseas.
It could. Yeah. So in order to discuss this, it's probably best to leave out specific companies, but just speak in generality. So the from where I stand, the tariffs, uh, the companies that are greatly affected by this, the United States-based companies that are greatly affected are the ones that have the largest share of worldwide business. That means international sales outside of the US. Um, for example, if your company was, for example, let's just say your sales were 60% domestic, 40% international, that could be a problem for you. Yeah, because yeah, if there's a boycott or retaliation um or pricing issues where the price becomes prohibitive there, yeah, that could greatly affect your business, and it is affecting the business of certain companies that have that breakdown of their business between domestic and international. And then I would say that if a company was primarily US based in terms of their sales and they did not export, their exports were fairly minimal, then they will get through this with with minimal pain. Um, but I think that when you said sort of, I think you said targeted or picked on, yeah, I think that it would be targeted only because, like you mentioned, Canada, they know how important that this business is to these companies, and it's a way to retaliate. There's no question. And
And I think they're seen as so American.
yeah, uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah. I I don't see it. My personal opinion is I don't see it long term because I think that kind of an age-old expression, cutting off your nose to spite your face kind of thing. Um, if there's a retail store in another country that chooses not to sell this phenomenal product that they've had on their shelf for many years, they're kind of hurting themselves also,
mm.
and so, but in order to make the point, and I think there would be a point where that would diminish in terms of the intensity behind it, and that we collectively, the industry, we would be able to get through this. But yeah, it's an issue, yeah, especially I think with even greater with publicly traded companies that are under pressure to perform um, for the stockholders. So yeah, this is the tariff has been uh, a tough situation for certain companies. Like I said, it depends on the breakdown of your domestic versus export.
Is it necessarily related to the size of the company? Do the larger companies export more than, to some degree, it has to relate to that because a small startup, it hasn't spread its wings
No,
enough to sell.
yeah, a small startup to this point would not have had the wherewithal to even have their product have meaningful distribution um, outside of the United States. Other companies who have been doing business worldwide for years, that's a huge percentage of their business, and if that is diminished in any way, it can certainly be painful for the company.
Could it possibly lead to bootlegging where uh, people are somebody that lives in England that's really fond of bourbon and has their family member coming over to bring me two bottles uh, over.
Uh, it- Possibly, yes, yeah. Uh, uh, some 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 degree of bootlegging would be possible. Yes.
I'm thinking
Yeah,
back
yeah,
on the Coors beer
yeah.
beginning years where people were making tons of money bringing it across the Mississippi River and selling it for outrageous prices,
Before it was available in all 50 states. Yeah,
right?
yeah. I remember those days. Yeah,
Yeah. Um, so, but what I hear you saying in terms of the effect of the tariffs is that things change, politics changes,
Hmm.
um, and you don't see it being a crippling blow to the industry in general, although larger companies that have exported more internationally will feel the bite.
Yeah. I, s- I certainly don't want to minimize it. I don't want to minimize the effects, the, the financial effects of this for certain large companies because it is real and it is hurting them. Um, my point, and I was in no way to be, cavalier about this, but my point would be I'm optimistic to think that it has a lifespan and it will run through this. Um, um, a solution will be found.
Okay. What haven't we covered that you would be interested in talking about? And maybe part of, you know, let, I said we were going to come back to this, so let's do. So nix that idea. Um, in terms of your desire to be a consultant
Yes. Mhm.
and a consultant to startups, talk a little bit about that and where you think you can bring some value.
Yeah, I'd like to. Thank you. So when I knew that my days at Heaven Hill were winding down, I was leaving the organization, and it was time. Um, but I was not ready to retire per se. I just don't relate to that, as I don't think you do either, Mark.
Oh,
Uh, but so then how can I continue in the industry that I know and I love and have thrived in it in a meaningful way? And so I thought, well, okay, well, I'm going to the perhaps the obvious route to take at this point would be as a consultant. But what value are you going to be able to bring as a consultant is the key. So essentially, I've gone out and started my own LLC known as the Smart Approach. As a spirits industry consultant, distilled spirits consultant, if you will. The hypothesis being that there are men in these last 5 to 10 years, they've created many new startup small companies with perhaps one product, two, three, four products in the bourbon field, in the bourbon industry. And these companies, they they know how to acquire whiskey or bourbon liquid. They seem to know they've figured out how to bottle it, how to get a label on it, how to come up with a general marketing concept for their unique product. And they've most likely have identified and signed on with a distributor to distribute their products. So they can start doing business. Um, but what they don't really know is perhaps what I have learned over all these years in the business, in particular the last 22 years, is more in the area of frankly, it's in more of a nuance, and that would be how to bring your brand forward in a meaningful way, first by cultivating a meaningful relationship at the distributor level to to get this distributor to want to sell your product, to take ownership of it and create it their own, and own this product enough to go out and make it successful. To create marketing strategies around the product is something that most of the startups have not fully grasped at this point, and I can help with that. And um, and then any company who is spreading their wings enough to start developing their own leadership within their company. meaning especially in the sales end, sales leadership, sales managers, sales consultants on the street. One of the things that I can help with is the hiring, the developing, and the implementation of these employees out into the field in a way that will make a difference. Because managing a sales team is really at the heart of what I've been doing and what I enjoy doing and what I feel I do well. But before you can manage one, you need to put one together. You need to assemble one, and that requires the ability to do meaningful um, uh, interviews and a selection process to where you have the people in your team who can best serve your purpose. And so I feel like I have that as a strength also. So the smart approach essentially is is geared towards that space within these new startups and um, craft brands that has yet to be filled because, and I don't blame them for that, they just don't have the experience to do it. It takes years to develop this. So I'm available to help for that.
Very good. And if someone wanted to reach out to you for your services, how would they best reach you?
Well, they can reach me by email at john at smartapproachconsulting.com.
Got
John,
it.
I will repeat that, John at smartapproachconsulting.com. And I will look forward to receiving some messages.
Awesome. Well, this has been really interesting, and especially to me, since I my adult years were spent in the Louisville area, and you just couldn't spend any time in Louisville without having the industry affect you, similar to horse racing. And it
Hmm.
seems like um, there's quite a synergy between horse racing and bourbon, um, in lots of different ways, especially that the core areas, geographic areas, the Lexington area, the Bardstown area, are just huge horse
Yes. Yeah, but
areas.
yeah, I mean, I live out here in central Kentucky where the horse breeding industry is at its pinnacle. You have Keeneland Race Course just a few miles from where I'm speaking to you right now. Obviously, Churchill Downs and Louisville. So these institutions are surrounded by the bourbon industry. And yes, there is an integration aspect to it. But the other thing that's so interesting and truthfully inspiring these days is how the this industry has contributed to the success of people who are more on the periphery of the industry, and so or have found creative ways themselves to be part of this business. For example, the touring companies that you see out there where people have started in businesses to bring to all this tourism, you know, is what's happening here is an increase in tourism, and companies have taken advantage of that by creating the touring companies to take people around to these places. The hotels that have come up from this Hotel Distill downtown Louisville on Main Street um, is a hotbed of activity for people coming in to for the specific reason of going on the Bourbon Trail, as it's referred to. And in many ways, and I could many, not just me, but many people could see this coming years ago to where this part of Kentucky's um, would be similar to that of you could refer to it as the Napa Valley analogy, where people organize vacations and trips to go to Napa Valley and spend a week there touring various distilleries. That is what's happening here. I said distilleries a minute ago. I meant to say wineries, excuse me. But here in Kentucky, people are coming in here. This is where they are traveling to from all over the country, all over the world, actually, coming in here, getting a hotel, staying for 3 or 4 nights, and then the restaurants benefited from it too. So the hotels, the restaurants, the touring companies going around. So there's a lot of people who have the the industry is more than just the products that you see on the shelf. It's a blossoming industry in many respects, and it's very exciting.
And most of the distilleries, the major ones, have how do you refer to the center to hear about the history, to look at the product being
Mhm.
made
They
in
have they all
in the
have
vats.
tasting rooms. They have consumer interaction facilities, um, and that's another big part of the business is the again that tourist aspect of it. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's very important.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us. Really interesting to me, and hopefully it was to the audience. And I'll look forward to a follow-up. Maybe we'll plan to meet again shortly and talk about this. I'm especially interested in the economic impact
Hmm.
of this moment
Yes.
and how it affects the industry
Yeah,
long
we
term.
can do that.
Sounds,
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. And pardon me for interrupting. What
no,
I
go
was
ahead.
going to say is I would look forward to getting back together because in many respects there is so much going on here, but I feel like we've just scratched the surface here today. But I hope one thing you can take from this is, and from what you're hearing from me is a certain enthusiasm for this business. I really do love it, and hundreds and thousands of other people do as well in this industry. But it's exciting times, and there's no reason why it won't continue.
And let's encourage the audience to make it a destination, Lexington, Louisville, the
Hmm.
Bourbon Trail, and go tour some of these
Hmm.
distilleries and tasting rooms.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, John, thanks so much for being with us again on the OutMarket.Pro podcast. To learn more about John, you can find his contact information in the show notes down below. We'll put that email address. You can also learn more about OutMarket.Pro and our small business solutions, as well as marketing, down in the show notes. Or visit us online at www.outmarket.pro. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that notification bell to make sure that you don't miss an episode. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the OutMarket.Pro podcast.